Hi there. This is a condensed summary of everything we know about the cancelled Long Night prequel pilot to Game of Thrones, called Bloodmoon, incorporating a lot of information that came out just last week in two big updates. One, a casting update from the news site Redanian Intelligence, and the other, an interview with an extra who worked on the pilot, posted by YouTuber Lucifer Means Lightbringer. Lucifer also did some follow-up questions with this extra that he just sent me back over private message, and among other things, both sources independently support the leaks we've heard, that this prequel was rejected because it was ridiculously racist, in that the way they decided to shove black people in at the last minute was to cast only black people as children of the forest, the primitive, non-human, tribal elf guys. This prequel was a disaster. It was an awful idea since day one over the objections of all the book fan sites, and we had to suffer through a bunch of hype about this empty shell of a project for a year and a half. That was insulting at just how much people were willing to turn their brains off and believe in the blind hype. Hey, we're doing a Long Night pilot. And nothing else, and people were running convention panels on how amazing it was going to be, based on nothing. And HBO treating it as the only prequel when we know you said there were 5 ideas. They picked this ahead of all the real prequels actually based on the prequel novellas Martin wrote. So, why am I still reporting on this, even though it's already cancelled? Well, to start with, all of the HBO executives who picked the Long Night prequel are still in positions of authority. None of them suffered any repercussions for this. There were no consequences. Casey Bloys is still the head of HBO's drama department. He was the guy actively championing the Long Night prequel at every big TCA news panel over the past year and a half. And as for former HBO CEO Richard Plepler, he did leave HBO because he cynically jumped ship and is now in charge of Apple TV Plus, big new streaming platform. Plepler is now in charge of the network making the live-action adaptation of Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. I don't want that. So I'm continuing to report on this disaster because I'm insulted that these two men keep managing to fail upwards. This report is an accusation against incompetent executives who are continuing to fail upwards over such ridiculous and, in this case, extremely racist things. How do you still have jobs? Plepler and Bloys are also the two guys who greenlit Benioff's Confederate show without a pilot back in 2017, which thankfully there was so much backlash they didn't go through with it. Plepler and Bloys are the Confederate guys, the Confederate and Long Night guys, and they're still leading figures in the TV industry, affecting TV shows we watch. I won't stand for this. So why am I reporting on it even though it's cancelled? Well, why report on Fire Festival or the Theranos scandal long after everyone involved was already arrested? Well, why report on failed movie projects and box office bombs? Like I'm thinking of an extreme example, that late 1990s failed Superman movie with Nicolas Cage. It was never released. The one Kevin Smith talks about, he had a miserable experience on as a writer. They butchered his script. He left the project. I mean, the really biggest infamous failed projects, we're reporting on all the behind-the-scenes mess to hold it up for public shame. And as a warning, this is an accusation. The warning is, yes, it can really get this bad. The people involved really were this incompetent. We should never allow them to work in this industry again. They need to be treated as pariahs over this. You shouldn't be going, hey, it's Casey Bloys and Richard Plepler at the TCA panel, any more than you'd welcome Elizabeth Holmes to a medical panel in 2020. It is ridiculous, and they just think, well, act casual, act like nothing changed. And so far, nothing did change for them. And even if they were punished for all this, which none of them have been, it's a warning that in general principle we must be eternally vigilant. That things really can get this bad, and we must actively scrutinize projects before they've finished, instead of letting the big studios ruin major franchises due to being under no oversight whatsoever. That's what I'm fighting against, a fundamental lack of oversight. The failure of Game of Thrones Season 8 wasn't anything new. Many fans were upset since they abandoned the story of the books in Season 5. But even before that, going back to the original failed pilot for Game of Thrones, there were warning signs. They were that bad. And so were we. The news media that should have been scrutinizing all this, they let us down. They failed us. They shrugged it off as, oh, the failed pilot. It's just one of those things. No, they were active warning signs that everything they did wrong in that, like not knowing how exposition works, are things they did in later seasons. It was all there. Similarly, I'm not going to let them shrug off as, oh, the Long Night prequel pilot, it was just one of those things, it was a fluke. Sometimes things just don't gel together. Cursed black people elves isn't just something that didn't gel together well. This isn't just something that happens. It doesn't just happen. This is what happens when incompetent, crazy people are in charge of projects with no oversight, and trained people in cinematography and script writing are shut out by old boys networks and nepotism. How do they still have jobs? The studios let us down, the news media let us down, the people who were blithely going, hooray, Season 8 will be awesome, blithely going, wow, I sure bet that Long Night prequel will be awesome, when they didn't know a damn thing about it and never even tried to ask questions. I remember a time when they were worried about whether book fans would like Season 1. We will never be so out of control again. From now on, we will be the ones holding the reins to the horse bit jammed in their teeth. Because we will never have another, you want a good girl but you need the bad pussy, another Sansa rape, another Arya killing the Night King, another goddamn prequel series that intended to cast black people as cursed elves. There will be accountability. We will never be so powerless again. Let me explain the structure of the report that I'm going to present to you with this. Now, like I said, I've been reporting on the Long Night prequel pilot since it was announced, through filming, through its cancellation. So for over a year, spread out across different months, I had all of these videos reporting on it and analyzing it. And when you add up the runtime of that full playlist, I made over 8 hours of content. It's just over a year. There was no other stuff being produced. Game of Thrones was over. And add to that all of the new leak information we got in summer of 2020 from multiple different reports, just well over 8 hours of content. And the purpose of this video, just 1 year anniversary, 1 year since the cancellation, was to condense over 8 hours worth of reports into one coherent video that you can sit down in one sitting, watch the whole thing, not a playlist, condensing 8 hours into about 2 hours and change of summary. And you watch this if you hadn't been following any of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and it'll pretty much bring you up to speed on what we know, because we didn't find out that much from it. But when you cross-reference all these different reports, a lot of them are pointing to the same things and starting to form a coherent pattern. And what it looks like wasn't that good. That they were making something really weird. So what order am I going to go through? I'm going to start off with just 5 minutes on the core problems that were inherent to making a Long Night prequel in the first place. It was a dumb idea to begin with. I mean, the first day it came out, the book fan sites were all saying this is the worst possible idea. Then 5 minutes on filming phase notes, things we found out from spy photos and stuff, which wasn't that much. It's like 6 or 7 points, basically admitting the Casterlys are in it, that sort of thing. Then the big thing of substance we had was the report with the staff linguist Peterson, who, while he didn't admit much, what he could say is confirmed because he's an official source. So the one first big source is Peterson, then the extra report that Lucifer Means Lightbringer posted. Then the third thing is the leak I made. Well, I heard it months before, but I came out and said all the racial stuff right after it was canceled. Then going back to their stuff LML didn't put out publicly yet, but he told me after his report that, yeah, my extra confirmed everything that your report said. Then cross-referencing that with the Redanian intelligence casting leak. Not just about the Children of the Forest stuff, but all the different character names, and what can we glean from this of what exactly were they trying to do? And the casting section's a lot of in-the-weeds details. That's the last full 40 minutes of this report. But all the core stuff is in the first hour. The casting stuff will go into more detail then. And hopefully 2 hours and change, you'll be brought up to speed on this, and I really hope you share this with other people of what the heck were they making, and how do you still have jobs? And this is so crazy, we can't just let it slide as, oh, it's one of those things. This needs to be handled better, and that this, for over a year, was being held up as the only prequel worth talking about, and very nearly cost all the other prequels from even being made. We have to make sure this type of thing doesn't happen again. Starting with some quick background context, this is a list I made right after they announced this in summer 2018 of why were so many book fan sites, anyone who was familiar with the material, saying this is a terrible idea for a prequel. Narrowed it down to 4 points. Core problems with making a Long Night prequel, just in general principle. This was a dumb idea from the start. Point 1, it very specifically rehashes the White Walker storyline. Point 2, if you're a non-book reader, you might not know this, it isn't actually based on any narratives that George R.R. Martin wrote. Not even a thin outline like some other prequel ideas, like Valyria, Blackfire Rebellion, Free Cities don't have a prequel novella as such, the way the Dance of the Dragons does. Some of these are still, story ideas. More so than anything else, he never intended to set a narrative then. And this is according to Westeros.org, who, their runners, Elio and Linda, they co-wrote the World of Ice and Fire sourcebook with him. They would know, they worked with him, that he has no notes on this era that he shared with them, that he never intended to flesh out more than he already did. This wasn't some era he wanted to round out. It's the dawn of prehistory, the era of legend. We might find out a bit more in the later books, but this was really HBO forcing their own choice, that they said he would never have picked this. This was HBO latching on to White Walker hype, which was at its height in 2017, 2018. This fever pitch of, hooray, the Night King. It's just empty White Walker hype to build into that. That he never intended to set a prequel then, that there isn't a novella for it, for that matter. It's not like, well, there's an interesting chapter in the World book on it, the World of Ice and Fire source book. There was nothing to tell. Point 3, this is to the point that there aren't even really that many characters that George R.R. Martin outlined for this era. Yes, if you're new to all this, as a catchphrase, they can say, oh, it's about Bran the Builder and who made the wall. Literally all we know about Bran the Builder is that one sentence. He's the legendary founder of House Stark who built the wall in Winterfell. Anything else would be a pure invention by HBO. And on top of that, related to that there isn't a narrative, these are separate characters, the different heroes in the Age of Heroes, who never interact with each other. So if they do cram in Lan the Clever into the same story as Bran the Builder, this is just them mix and matching things to get the names out there, to force together this contrived story. Lan the Clever and Bran the Builder never interact. Lan isn't part of the Long Night story. And they're just mixing things together to cobble together something vaguely resembling a TV show. And worst of all, in my opinion, a rehash should at least have a nostalgia hook. Like, hooray, it's a prequel, we're doing Dance of the Dragons, see King's Landing again. Or you have something entirely different, like the Valyria prequel, where it's exciting new places. Most of Westeros during the Long Night is primeval forest. It's not new locations. Most of the locations we're familiar with don't even exist, like King's Landing, Winterfell. It's probably the only one that might exist, and it's a ring fort. A primitive ring fort. There aren't exciting new places and locations, and while their culture might be a little different, we know nothing about it. Like, the Faith of the Seven isn't there. All these other cultural elements aren't there. Very few world-building aspects of Game of Thrones would be in it. And on top of the locations, cultural things, it offers only the absence of things. While you might think, oh, that's a blank slate for them to fill in, it's nothing from George Martin, and they have shown they are incapable of making their own content without him. And anything they made would just be a fabrication. Not even just something he hinted at in outline form. So, rehash of the White Walkers, blatantly not something he ever intended to round out into a prequel era, to the point there aren't characters in it, real characters of substance. Like the way that even in the prequel novellas, like Visenya Targaryen is a character, Rhaenyra Targaryen or Alicent Hightower come across as characters. That's not like that with Lan the Clever or Bran the Builder. And it's just an empty forest. It's Druid times in prehistory of Westeros. These aren't exciting ancient civilizations. So these were bad ideas from the start. The co-authors of the World Book with Martin, who run Westeros.org, Elio and Linda, said, this is officially the worst possible prequel idea. We never would have considered it. Martin never would have considered it. They're clearly just going with hype. Now, in terms of what HBO itself actually told us about what they were doing, it never extended beyond the one-paragraph press release they gave in June of 2018 when they picked it. And just every month we get casting reports, they keep going, no, trust us. And it's like a year later, start of season 8, and they're conspicuously not telling us anything, and filming will start on it soon. So they only really gave us two things. First, that one paragraph. Taking place thousands of years before the events of Game of Thrones, the series chronicles the world's descent from the golden age of heroes into its darkest hour. And only one thing is for sure, from the horrifying secrets of Westeros' history to the true origin of the White Walkers, the mysteries of the East, whatever that means, to the Starks of legend, it's not the story we think we know. And how. Sorry, and some people who really do not know the background material are going, oh, the golden age of heroes. It wasn't a peaceful golden age. It was the golden age in the sense of the age of legend and myth and heroes fighting sea monsters and things. And it's weird that they phrased it like that. And I keep wondering what Mysteries of the East means. Either that wasn't an official release, it implies there's characters from the Eastern continent, much in the way that Melisandre was from the East. Just because she was in Westeros doesn't mean we saw a Shai, which is in the far east of Essos. I have no idea what that line meant even now. But that's the one paragraph description they gave us. And they gave us literally one other thing officially through HBO in terms of character descriptions. When they announced that Naomi Watts was cast later that October, this is the only person who got a character description. They said, she's playing a charismatic socialite hiding a dark secret. No idea what that means. Probably means she's a member of a noble house, apparently. Or maybe some equivalent to that, and we had one spy photo of her in full costume, that she's not some peasant's mother or something, she's clearly a member of the nobility. Other than that, we're not, even now, I'm telling you, I'm not exactly sure who she was playing. I think she was playing a Casterly, but that's a guess. Then, and this is covering a full year of filming, guys, this is the conclusion chart that I made at the end of my hour-long video, actually 2 separate hour-long videos, summarizing the filming process, which concluded by the end of summer of 2019. 7 major points we got from all the spy photos, and all the remarks they made. Point 1, Starks, White Walkers, direwolves, and mammoths are in it. Because they were using a mammoth as their production symbol, and Martin mentioned pretty conspicuously direwolves existed then, we're pretty sure they were going to have direwolves and mammoths in it in some form. And they said Starks and White Walkers are in it in their press release. Point 2. There was a lot of filming in natural cave locations in Northern Ireland, as well as expansive cave sets in Belfast, which we saw through spy photos, that they're the interiors of these caves, some of them they're making at the Titanic Studios, which presence of a lot of caves seems to imply that the Children of the Forest are going to be in Season 1, or possibly Casterly Rock, which is built into a coastal mountain, or possibly both. Some of these I'm pretty sure were Casterly Rock, as we saw what looked like a stylized lion statue. Point 3. Casterly Rock and Land the Clever are in it. We can pretty much confirm that. They were filming at a coastal cliff location in southern Italy that looks like Casterly Rock. It's coastal cliffs. And the same week they were doing this filming, and it was so conspicuous with boats and stuff, that they knew spy photos had gone out. That same week, by no coincidence, George R. R. Martin gave an interview where, unprompted, he started talking about Casterly Rock and the Lannisters and how they swindled it from the Casterlys, and explaining, well, the Lannisters as such might not exist yet, but their founder, Land the Clever, might be the origin story of the Lannisters through Land the Clever. So from him not too coincidentally remarking on this, it was all but certain that, yeah, they're shoving in Land the Clever and Casterly Rock into this, even though that has nothing to do with the Long Night storyline. And, at times they were saying, at times they did call it Age of Heroes on their paperwork in the background, but then they switched to calling it the Long Night Prequel or Bloodmoon. We're not really sure what their focus was in this. Martin said he wanted to call it the Long Night. And if it's something about the Long Night, Land the Clever isn't really going to be in it. Point 4. As I said, spy photos of Watts and a couple of extras showed costumes that looked like Bronze Age Greece more than Bronze Age Britain. That Westeros in this time, it's Druidic Britain. They're Celts. They're not that sophisticated. It's primitive. And they gave this look that looked very Grecian and Mediterranean. And granted, we don't know exactly what society was like before the Long Night. They could have been a little more advanced. But this is unusual costuming. What culture are they from? It doesn't look like anything we know about. And maybe they're all dressed up for a special occasion or something. It's probably not their day-to-day wear. But we got a brief look at her costume in one spy photo and a couple of the others. Also, we found out that in character, Watts' character is apparently blonde, even though the First Men usually aren't blonde. That they said Andals usually tend to be blonde more than the First Men, but that might be more of a guideline than a rule. Point 5. We saw a spy photo of a rusted pile of iron suits in the Bronze Age. That the whole point is this is Bronze Age Westeros, and when you have bronze weapons, like the Statue of Liberty, it oxidizes green, not to red rust. So this is clearly rusted iron, not rusted bronze. What's going on here? Whose iron armor is this? I'm not sure. Then, extrapolating from the casting sheets, and I go over this separately, point 6, when you look at the casting sheets, the only non-white characters are described as black. And so many people were assuming, well, they must be going to Yiti, which is their fantasy version of China, when they haven't cast a single Asian person. Leading into point 7, linked to 6, based on races they didn't cast for, like Asian people, Latino people, Middle Eastern people. They didn't cast people who look like they come from Yiti or the Giscari in Slaver's Bay or the Rhoynar, who were the ancestors of the Dornish. People just kept saying, oh, the Rhoynar will be in this, and they haven't cast a single Middle Eastern Latino person. What races are they casting in this? Certainly Yiti isn't in it, just based on the races of what the casting sheets are calling for. Then something exciting happened after they were canceled this last October 2019. Linguist David J. Peterson gave a podcast interview, and I have separate videos covering each of these major chapter breaks. I have a video on what Peterson said. This is the bullet point version of that he never saw the full script. They asked him to translate stuff or make lyrics for things, but he is an official source. What few things he said are confirmed, not rumor. Well, Peterson said the Andals are in it. He made an Andal language for it. Specifically, he said he made Andal lyrics for wedding songs. He said, this is the first time we heard of this, the pilot episode prominently features this big wedding scene, setting up a political alliance that sets the plot in motion. Sort of like how the first episode of Game of Thrones starts with the Daenerys-Drogo marriage alliance. So, okay, that starts with a political marriage scene. And he also made a language for the Children of the Forest, so they should be in it from the beginning. He said, well, he actually made it for Season 6, but he said, I did a lot more work rounding it out for the pilot of this. So they should be in Season 1 and not just something they build up to in Season 4 of this, that they'll only meet the children later. They would be in it from the beginning, leading to the question, who was cast as the Children of the Forest? But throughout this interview, he only mentions the First Men, the Andals, and the Children of the Forest, seeming to imply that the story is confined to just Westeros itself. Only these groups. It isn't a sprawling story across multiple continents. 10 years ago, if someone said, oh, they're doing a Long Night story, your instant response is, but the Long Night is just in the north, in Westeros, and around where the wall was built. You wouldn't instantly assume, well, I guess it'll go to other continents. No, the mere mention of the Long Night, it didn't affect the other regions. The narratives don't overlap like that. At any rate, Peterson made it sound like it's just these three groups in the storyline. As for how they're fitting Andals into it, I have no idea, and I'm not sure if they were mashing together the story of the Andal invasions with the Long Night, or if these are just some Andals who happen to come to Westeros, because, the Narrow Sea is narrow, it's easy to cross. Maybe some Andals came west as mercenaries. There's rumors in the world of Ice and Fire that Lan the Clever may have been an Andal who was exiled, or his family went west, we're not sure. So they were in contact with them. They were relatively nearby people. They were on the west coast of the eastern continent, around where Pentos is today. It's still, how are the Andals fitting into this? But this isn't rumor. Peterson confirmed they are in the pilot. There's wedding lyrics. They said the lyrics were generically just well wishes for a wedding, so he didn't know what they were doing in the story. So Peterson described these three language groups, that he made a language for the Andals. And for the First Men, actually, he acknowledged that they're all technically speaking the old tongue of the First Men, not the common tongue of the Andals that is spoken in modern Westeros and Game of Thrones, which is thousands of years later. So because they're the most widespread group in this, the Starks and the Casterlys, while technically speaking Old Tongue, he said that's universally translated as English for the sake of the viewers. That what they're saying defaults to English for the sake of the audience, and I fully agree with that. That's what I would have done. Now, we understand, they're probably not speaking the language of 8,000 years later, but it's translated for our benefit. So, First Men defaults to English. He made an Andal language, which, well, actually, they can't be speaking modern Andal, which is English. So he had to come up with, well, they're speaking ancient Andal, which 8,000 years of time, yeah, that would change the language. So he, reverse engineered this form of Old English that never truly existed with Old English vowel sounds. He describes this in the podcast. It's very interesting, of how he came up with archaic ancient Andal. And then the First Men just speak English, and the third group is the Children of the Forest. Now, Peterson shared one more very important piece of information. It's important because another leak source, which I'm going to explain later in this same video, seemed to be corroborated by it. So remember this. He said what the name of the Children of the Forest is for themselves in their own language. Now, the books do say that there's a point where Leaf tells Bran that, well, our name for ourselves, we don't call ourselves the Children of the Forest. In our own language, our name for ourselves translates as those who sing the songs of the earth. Those who sing the song of the earth. And Martin isn't a linguist, so he never even tried to make up sample words for that, like, well, Dracarys is Valyrian for Dragonfire. We don't have a single sample of that. So Peterson said, working with George R. R. Martin behind the scenes, I worked out what their language would be like. So he made the original, translating into that language, what does those who sing the song of the earth sound like? And Peterson is a professional linguist, and I am not. And their language includes a lot of non-English pronunciations. So it's two words. I'm going to try and say it. It sounds like Gernamora with really trilled R's. I'm not saying it right. And thankfully, the podcast interviewer said, "Wow, how do you spell that?" And Peterson spelled it out of this is how it appears in print. Gerna, and the next word is Mohra. And he even specified that that means those who sing the song of the earth, but you can call them just the Mora for short, which means the singers. So Gerna is their word for the earth or Westeros or both, and the Mora. So he said that in the pilot, people refer to them as just the Mora for short. And keep in mind, it's hard to pronounce, and you wouldn't really know how to transliterate it the way he does because he's using different rules. That will come up again. One other detail related to language is writing. Just as what we hear as English in Game of Thrones was officially the Andal language, the writing system that we saw, like with the messenger ravens delivering letters, that's officially the Andal writing system. It explains in the books, the Andals introduced the first full writing system to Westeros. The First Men did have a crude writing system. It was more of a rune system. It was basic. It was used for simple tasks like marking graves and sometimes structures. It was used for basic inscriptions, but they didn't write messages in it, didn't write books in it. And it says it multiple times that history gets really fuzzy before the Andal invasions because there weren't physically history books. The Game of Thrones TV show actually has briefly depicted this, that in the sigil of House Royce from the Vale, the books describe that their sigil has First Men runes in it. So rather than making up something from scratch, the Game of Thrones art department just reused real-life Anglo-Saxon runes. You look closely at the sigil that he's wearing on his cape, it's got Anglo-Saxon runes in it. And they go, well, in universe, those are First Men runes. But the question remains, and yet when we had a full year without much info on this show, this is one of the things I was debating in my earlier videos. Do they have a writing system or not? Or would we see runes in this? Was one of the questions I was discussing last year before filming started. And we are all debating this on the world-building aspects of during the Age of Heroes, before the Andals came, the First Men of Westeros were by and large a pre-literate society. So, would they actually send letters to each other? Did the Messenger Raven network exist then, or in its current form? Or, separate from that, would we see sets that are prominently decorated with First Men runes, like maybe the weirwood around a heart tree that someone has in their castle has a lot of runes decorating it, the approach to it or something. Just to show visually this is a different time period, their writing system is more archaic. Well, we do have an answer for this, and I haven't reported on this before. I actually managed to get into email contact with one of the lead concept artists for both Game of Thrones and Bloodmoon, Michael Eaton. He's been working on the show since season 2. He's worked on all sorts of designs, beautiful stuff, book writing, the Alchemists Guild's Arcane Notebook, to the White Book of the Kingsguard. He's done a lot of stuff. And he didn't tell me much. I just asked him some basic questions. He didn't give me any real spoilers on this, so don't get too hyped about this. But I explained this question to him as I just explained it to you of, well, the First Men have a different writing system. Would you do that the same way? Because you're the guy who writes the medieval script in things like the Kingsguard book. Were you handling writing on this show as well? Did you have to develop a rune system for that? He gave me a short reply in which he politely wrote back, was thankful I was so interested in this, and he said that, well, simply, we didn't develop a full system of First Men runes for the Bloodmoon pilot, just because, to his knowledge, No writing of any kind appears on screen during the pilot episode. Maybe this would have come up during a full first season if they ever got it. We'll never know. So they sort of backburnered the issue, so it wasn't really a thing for the pilot where they're focused on more basic questions like what do things look like their heraldry and things. Writing is kind of far down the list, but it's just, it's a detail. And this isn't even a problem. I mean, it's not like you have to hide it, go to that much effort to hide it. Think about it. Did the first episode of Game of Thrones, by itself, ever have the camera actually focus on a letter delivered by a messenger raven? Or do they usually just have someone summarize what they said? Like, most episodes of Game of Thrones could pass without you ever seeing any writing in it. Yeah, there's like a small council meeting where they're looking at a letter someone sent. Those aren't as common. That for the most part, a string of episodes could pass without seeing any actual writing in it. Even in like regular TV shows, like a lawyer drama, how many times do you actually see a letter that is relevant to the plot that you need to show? So, okay, it just didn't come up in the first episode. And that's one new little detail we can confirm about it, that no, they didn't go ahead and do that. If I was making this, it was a fan-made, and the fans wouldn't really want a Long Night prequel, as, the ancient past. But if we were doing that, I'd insist, put in a lot of, First Men runes, Anglo-Saxon runes, to give it that old feeling. But, okay, they avoided it for the first one. It would probably have had to come up later on. I don't know. Also, Eaton confirmed that he is the artist who designed that heraldry banner for that leaked boat photo, the one that looks like a proto-Stark sigil that we spent so much time obsessing over. This isn't really a leak. He just confirmed, oh yeah, I'm the head graphic artist on this pilot. Yes, I personally designed that heraldry thing that everyone knows was leaked as a spy photo. That's not really admitting anything. Yeah, that's one of mine. And he confirmed that there was other artwork in it, of course, that now we'll never see. Because he designs not just writing and heraldry, but, decorations and chandeliers. He designs all sorts of things on Game of Thrones. So, well, his exact words, which he gave nothing away. He just said exact words. And yes, I did design that banner on the boat, too, which was leaked for Bloodmoon. That doesn't tell us anything about what's just... That banner on the boat was one of mine. And there's lots of other cool stuff in the project. It's very sad it'll never be seen. But it was very nice of him to write back to me and just confirm, oh yeah, I was doing the heraldry stuff in it, not that I can talk about it. And there didn't happen to be writing on screen in the first episode, so we didn't devote time to working on a system for it. Well, if you go to Michael Eaton's website, he does have a page for Bloodmoon concept art in his menu, but it's Bloodmoon concept art pending release by HBO. It hasn't been released yet. And at this point, I don't think HBO will ever let anything more from this canceled project become publicly available. I don't think they'll ever give him permission to release it. Even the artwork he used as a cover image there for the folder, that's a piece of fan art he found. By the way, don't assume, oh, this must be something new. That's not an official logo. He's just using it as a placeholder, because he can't even use like the logos he himself designed. So that's not fair to him, because, a lot of work went into this. I do hope to see Mr. Eaton's work again in House of the Dragon, and probably will, because, there's going to be a lot of writing in it. It's letters. They use the writing system it's only 200 years before Game of Thrones. So I hope to see more of his designs in that. On to the next section. Last week, YouTuber Lucifer Means Lightbringer did an interview with an extra who claimed to have worked on the Long Night pilot, worked on Bloodmoon. And he did a live stream video. He didn't have the extra talking on it. He gave a live stream video where he was reading off his notes at everyone of what they claimed was in it. And some of the things this extra said fit very well with other things we'd heard, to the point I found it very, very believable. But I caution, I don't doubt that this was a real extra who LML was in contact with. What I do doubt is that extras don't always have perfect knowledge of what's going on in a TV show. I mean, look at all the script security for Game of Thrones Season 8. For people who weren't at the live table read, those 24 core actors, like, the extras on Season 8 had no idea what the wider storyline was like and how all the pieces fit together. They never saw full scripts. Some of the third-tier actors would only get scripts containing the scenes they were personally in. And the same thing probably happened on Bloodmoon. That I don't think an extra would have seen the entire script, but they would have seen and heard things around set or on location. So some of the things this person said match up pretty well, that we're reasonably sure this was really an extra from it, and that the hope being more extras will come forward. And part of the reason I'm putting this out here is someone has to be the first leak. And okay, we're not sure if we can trust this. If a second independent leak comes out saying very similar things, and then a third independent one saying pretty much the same thing, we start getting a consistent message. So someone has to be first. It seems like this person is it. Some of the things they said match up, and just other news sites besides me were willing to run with this, like a Wort Zone blog, which is a big one for the books, was willing to mention this in conjunction with the Redanian intelligence thing, as it seemed probable. So I think this really is an extra, but they might not have had, but I caution that they might have had an imperfect understanding of the whole story that was going on. Now, LML in his video, he presented this as 4 big points. For clarity, I split that up into 6 big points, just because, well, this detail about that's really 2 things. Fine. Same stuff. Now, I'm cautioning you right now, the first point is the only one that I think even remotely could have originated from notes George R. R. Martin gave them and reflect the books in any way. That when he said, well, I had a few meetings with them where I tried to tell them stuff, and we're not even sure if they paid attention. So much of this is just they wanted to just make up a story in this setting that he didn't want to make a story then. So there's 1 or 2 things, though, that might have a kernel of truth in the books. But again, we're not making this analysis video to figure out, wow, this prequel is saying things that are true to book canon. I'm making this video to shame them for making up a crap prequel. But the point 1 here is the one thing that might come from Martin, and which LML is very excited about. To start with, he said that the extra told him that the immediate cause of the long night was in the form of a meteor shower. I say immediate cause because, was the doom of Valyria caused by volcanoes? On a very simplistic level, you could say that, but, well, something summoned the volcanic eruption, or in this case, meteor shower, or used it as a tool. So what force was driving this? It wasn't a natural event, but it was magic spurring this event. Was it summoned by the children of the forest? Was it summoned by the White Walkers? It's unclear. But that the immediate form or effect was a meteor shower. And I guess in my head I always pictured it as descending on Westeros like this huge blizzard from the north. But okay, it was a meteor shower, and this happens in the pilot, and at the end of it, and it kicks up dust and stuff that makes a mini ice age or something. I think it's implied, but meteor shower ushering in the long night. And the idea being that it makes the atmosphere so hazy that there's this lunar eclipse. This happens in real life with a blood moon, that the atmosphere is so hazy that the moon seems to turn blood red. And hence the name Blood Moon. So yeah, that actually sounds like a plausible reason they're calling it that, as their code name for the TV show, their functional name for it. And he did stress the extra didn't tell him it was a meteor strike on the moon. Just that, the atmosphere is messed up, the haze, all the dust kicked up. That makes sense. And this seems pretty plausible because there are some hints in the books about which channels like his have been guessing about that the immediate cause was a meteor shower, that rumors and legends from Karth about, well, a second moon exploded in the sky, or all the legends about Yeti and the world of ice and fire, that in Yeti there's legends that there's this meteor shower and this black stone fell to the earth and this evil Bloodstone Emperor killed his sister to seize the throne because he was worshipping the Black Stone, worshipping a meteorite, and the gods punished him by causing the Long Night. That the story of the Long Night in Yeeti seems to involve meteors. And it's subtle. It's not that many obvious clues, but there's enough you go, wait a minute, did it involve something like that? So, of course, Lucifer Means Lightbringer was ecstatic over this, and this was the main focus of his initial questioning, was about the meteor shower, which I was like, oh, okay, that doesn't really change that much in my mind. It's an interesting detail, but the bigger question is, what sent the meteor shower? What god or gods or demons or White Walkers or children of the forest sent this? This was just a tool for what sent it. Same thing with Valyria of, well, what caused the volcanic eruption? So that was pretty interesting, and it might explain why it's called Bloodmoon. That's the only thing that may have literally come from a one-page note by Martin saying what the later books are going to say about what specifically happened in the first Long Night. Warning you now, everything after that, though, is pure horseshit put together by HBO. It really seems just like crap they threw together. This could not be from Martin. He kept stressing I didn't come up with the characters. On top of that, all the political stuff. Everything else after this is about the specific political storyline in it, which this doesn't sound like it's him. It's contradicting the books, and it sounds awful. So just listening to it, the first point was, oh yeah, that could be in the books. The rest of this, no. So that was point one, the meteor shower. Point two, the extra claimed that there is a big wedding scene in the pilot episode, which again seems to confirm that. And I'll tell you now, if you check IMDb, there's like a minor background, obviously different actor listed as wedding guest. So there seems to be three sources now, and Peterson alone is an official source. If he says there's a wedding in it, that means there is. He's the staff linguist. But the fact that this extra was claiming there's a wedding scene in it made me think this report is probably more legitimate. Again, an extra who was on the ground, just hearing stuff on set, they might not have had perfect knowledge or understanding of it. But there's a big wedding scene in the pilot. This is point two. And specifically, it's a political marriage between a Stark princess and the last Casterly. This is interesting because Peterson thought that the bride at the wedding was an Andal woman. But Peterson also admitted that he was never shown the full script, that they just give him lyrics they want translated, and I don't think he was entirely sure on that. So there's room for doubt as to whether Peterson knew that with perfect certainty. And really, this seems to fit the spy photos we saw a lot better. At the Italy set that seemed to be their physical location for Casterly Rock with all the coastal cliffs, and they knew they couldn't hide this because it was out in the open, that there was filming of a boat on the water in the ocean, which was probably coming off of a CGI bigger seagoing ship, but it's a boat heading to shore that you see on your screen now that was prominently displaying what seemed to be an archaic version of the Stark sigil. And on closer inspection, the wood of the boat had direwolves carved into it. So how do I explain these apparently Stark men coming to Casterly Rock? At the time, I thought, well, maybe they're like political envoys come to protest the marriage. But in retrospect, it makes a lot more sense if there's this big wedding scene at Casterly Rock, and one of them is a Casterly and one of them is a Stark. Because we saw Starks coming with their banner like that. And the one photo we have of Naomi Watts, she's dressed pretty fancy. Maybe that's a wedding outfit. Not that she is the bride. Maybe, she's the mother of the bride, or just a cousin, or dressed in finery as you would wear to a wedding. Okay. The problem is then we have to explain, why are there Andal wedding lyrics when neither of them are Andals? Well, unless they're really screwing around by saying the Casterlys are Andals, which I doubt, that maybe the Casterlys had a previous marriage alliance with a different family member who is an Andal. I'm not sure. that could work out, that there's already Andals at court, and they're annoyed because they're getting displaced by the new marriage to the Starks. That's very hazy to me, but there's ways to explain that. But the simple fact that the boat image that we have makes a lot more sense if the Starks are visiting as part of their noble as being in this marriage. That actually makes more sense than what Peterson said. Point 3 is that Lan the Clever is in the pilot prominently, and Lan is the last Casterly's cousin. Well, how can they be both the last Casterly and have a cousin? Well, reconcile. It must be a maternal cousin. The extra didn't spell out maternal cousin, they just said cousin, but okay, the last male line Casterly. Like the Gardener Kings of the Reach, there was a last Gardener, even though the Tyrells have Gardener blood through the female lines. Okay, the last Casterly in the male line. Lan the Clever must be a maternal cousin of some kind. That's how he's working into this storyline. And it's all interrelated. It's how do we mash in the Lan the Clever storyline with the Long Night storyline? Because we want Starks and Lannisters in this prequel to get people to watch it, even if it doesn't make sense. Point 4, this was vague, that something along the lines of the Stark princess, the last Casterly, and his cousin Lan the Clever were going to be in a love triangle. Come on, this is just pandering to what did the teenagers want to watch today in their show, in Euphoria and CW shows. Oh, a love triangle. A Song of Ice and Fire doesn't really do love triangles. I mean, even, I have to stretch this, like, I wouldn't call Rhaegar and Elia a love triangle with Lyanna Stark. I mean, we think he wanted to marry both. Or Aegon the Conqueror's love triangle with both of his sister wives who you simultaneously married to at the same time. Not a love triangle. Or like Jon Snow never has a love triangle. He's torn between Ygritte and his duty, not another woman. You could stretch and say maybe Jaime, Cersei, and Brienne. That's in a whole other category, because it's like Brienne and Cersei are the angel and demon on his shoulders, and it's more about the struggle for his soul than teenagers caught between two loves. That's not a thing they do. Or like maybe one is the rivalry over the love of Shara Seastar between Bittersteel and Bloodraven. Finally got that right. But even then, it's because she was teasing them both and didn't really want to commit to either one. But this isn't really a show that has Harlequin romance love triangles like that. So that struck me as so stupid. But the report was actually kind of vague on that. I mean, I split. This was one big point about Lan the Clever, that he had 4 points. I split it into 6. I'm treating that separately. Maybe there was a love triangle that's not clear. So, Meteor's Stark princess marrying the last Casterly, whose maternal cousin is Lan the Clever, and they might get in a love triangle. Wow. Point 5 is a little interesting, though, that the Stark princess is supposed to be a greenseer like Bran Stark in Season 1. By which I mean, like Bran in Season 1, she's not fully aware of her powers yet, that she isn't this active greenseer, which, on the fence of that, on the one hand, it's, oh yeah, let's just make a copy of Bran as a character, let's have another greenseer. It seems so formulaic. But on the other hand, in a Targaryen prequel, I'd be annoyed if they didn't have dragon riders. This is what the Stark magic is. They have wargs and greenseers. So, okay, I can see you want to show more of the Stark magic. If anything, I was annoyed at how that got sidelined in the later seasons of Game of Thrones. So, and this is the age of magic. So we'd be annoyed if a main Stark character wasn't a greenseer. So, fine, that doesn't affect anything. And this is interesting, and will come up again later in the video. Point 6. Both the Stark and Casterly retinues at the wedding bring a green man priest with them. The priests of the old gods who are mythical and legendary, who, according to the books, the green men are this order of old god priests who tend the groves of weirwoods on the mysterious Isle of Faces in the midst of God's Eye Lake, which no living man has claimed to see. And they come up in the books twice, once in like the first Catalan chapter where you could tell this is him, this is Martin seeding something that'll be important later. The second time is a Bran Stark chapter where they go into a little more detail, and Mira Reed implies that her father actually did meet the Green Men because the Crannog men are strong in the ways of the old gods. They let him come. And it's interesting to think about House of the Dragon, that there is one character who claimed to have visited the Green Men and the Isle of Faces, Adam Velaryon, that he was seeking counsel before battle. So they say he flew his dragon to the Isle of Faces. But even in the book it goes, we're not sure if that's just a legend and if he did that at all. But there's rumors that he visited the Isle of Faces. Adam Velaryon is kind of like their Jon Snow character. He's this legitimized bastard. He rides a dragon. He's fun. So that might actually come up in House of the Dragon, the Green Men, that they're this mysterious group on the edge of the story that you can tell there's something Martin's waiting to give in full in a later installment of the book series. And the World of Ice and Fire did spell out that, well, like Bran said, there's legends that they're called the Green Men because they have green skin and literally have antlers growing out of their heads. You know, it's equally possible that's a distorted myth, and that they're just people who wear green clothes and have headdresses with antlers on them. We're not really sure. Are they human or not? How do they increase their numbers? And the Isle of Faces is this mysterious Avalon, like it's this hidden island that you can't find if they don't want you to find it on the lake. It's not on any map. So that's everything this extra covered in the first wave of stuff. Meteor Shower, Casterly Rock, Land the Clevers, the cousin to Last Casterly with this Stark Greenseer girl, and they're both accompanied by Green Men priests. So I'm in the live chat for this, and me and other people independently who've seen my report on this were asking him, hey, what about all those rumors we heard about the racial casting of the Children of the Forest? And he said he'd get back to us on that. Well, to cover that point now, I posted this as a separate video just recently, a recap of it, that in July 2018, my leak that I was told, that I said this is so crazy no one will believe me, I'll report on it right after it gets canceled. And it was canceled, and I told everyone that a source who had access to a series Bible for one of the other prequels, so people who would be around the writing offices and hear this kind of thing, and again, maybe they were misinformed. I don't think they were lying to me, but they might have been misinformed. It might have been an early idea. They were utterly dismissive of the Long Night prequel to me. They said, oh yeah, they picked it, they just rushed into picking it based on White Walker hype. They wanted main characters named Stark and Lannister, and they rushed into it not thinking out, wait a minute, in prehistoric Druid times Westeros, it's like Celtic Britain, there's no black people in it. Like, how would we have racial diversity? So they stumbled from one short-sighted quick fix to the next, that they told me that their solution to racial diversity was to cast only black people to play Children of the Forest. When I pointed out, well, we've seen them in Game of Thrones Season 6, they appear under prosthetics. That doesn't count as representation. And they said, well, yeah, so the way they're going to retcon that they didn't think of that until the next step, next short-sighted blunder, or they then belatedly went, oh no, now that we have black people as Children of the Forest, what choice do we have then to make a retcon to explain it? So to explain the discrepancy, they're going to say that these black humans living in Westeros as the indigenous people getting pushed out by white settlers later get a magical curse that turns them into non-human elf creatures. And I'm just stunned by this, and it's so insane. And then we started getting casting sheets coming out as the months passed, and this was in July of 2018. And then by January of 2019, it's, wow, with the first casting wave, it's just white people and black people. Lots of black people, enough that they seem to be a group. But no Asian people, or more importantly, not like Roynar-looking people who are Latino or Middle Eastern, like Oberyn Martell types. So, in the back of my mind, I was starting to get worried. Everything seems to be slowly lining up with what I was told. You know, vaguely, it's just, oh, they cast a lot of black people, and who could they be? And so many people just saw that, and, well, you have blind faith in HBO. We go, wow, look at how many black people they cast. We must be seeing the Summer Isles. Why do you trust these people after, like, the Sansa rape and TV Dorn and everything that happened? Do people still trust him after season 8? Like, that weird point after season 8 where, like, the pro TV show fan sites at, like, Con of Thrones were seriously trying to hype up the Long Night prequel. And the finale was a month ago, and you have such faith in HBO and over this, and it was weird. Then, last week, this big new casting report came out from Redanian Intelligence. It's this news site for The Witcher show on Netflix. And just front and center, it confirmed that here's named characters who are all children of the forest, and this is their image, not mine. It's 3 black children. Literally. One of them is actually playing Leaf, it said. They said we have their names. They have location names. They do this in the books, too, where they have names like Flint or Snowy Locks. Well, they said, well, we'll have them named Leaf and Cloud and Lake. So these weren't the black cast members that had already been announced. Again, like Naomi Watts never had a casting sheet. We wouldn't expect her to, that she was probably hand-picked for a role that important. I think something similar must happen for child actors, where if your role is that important, they handpick you without an audition. I'm not sure. And not just 3 for 3, 4 for 4, that in the spy photos, we saw a calendar of their filming locations, and they were filming for a whole week at somewhere called Enclave, which I'm pretty sure would mean enclave of the hidden children of the forest in their hidden tree and cave towns. And there's this 4th actor who is a young black male actor, a black child. And you just, enclave, I always, if you see my earlier videos, I assumed that meant children of the forest. So, yeah, you seem to be consistently casting black people as children of the forest. Maybe not all of them. There was one, Georgina Campbell, who we saw in a set photo right next to Naomi Watts, dressed in the same style. And therefore, I don't think she was a child of the forest, because she's dressed the same way. But the whole thing I was told is that they're not under prosthetics because they're magically cursed. That doesn't automatically prove the second part. It does seem to confirm the first part, that, yeah, all of these people are playing children of the forest. Which is silly. And even like winteriscoming.net and their reaction to the Redanian Intelligence thing, I don't know if they've even seen my report. Just reading off here, they were surprised at this. Wow, why are you casting only black people as these 3 children of the forest? Like, other news sites that reported on what they said were also confused by this. And I'm saying it's because it was ridiculously racist, and it's just poor planning. They didn't plan it out one step to the next of, these are things that people were actively, they go, oh, well, how are we to know? Every book site, this happened throughout the run of the show, where they'd have a problem and go, well, how are we to know we can't cram Dorne in only 40 minutes? Because everyone was yelling at you that you can't, or the director was telling you it's physically impossible. That every book site, among their list of problems with it was, how are you going to have racial diversity in, like, prehistoric Winterfell with no international travel? That's one way. And I gave some other casting information I'm going to go over later, but yeah. So because that was in the news, and then LML gave his thing, everyone in the chat room, including me, was going, hey, can you ask this extra, could they have possibly known what was going on with the children of the forest? And he said he'd get back to me once he talked to them, and he did. And it confirmed everything. The extra confirmed every detail of the leak I heard, and more. Yes, the children of the forest would appear as black humans without prosthetics, and yes, they were going to be turned into non-human creatures by a magic curse. What's upsetting is that the way the extra explained all this, the parts actually seemed to fit together. Not that they were any less offensive or made sense in terms of the story. What I mean is the leaks were overlapping and corroborating each other. That increasingly different sources saying different things were overlapping, that we seemed to be getting a coherent message consistently from their responses. So it's not like, when you turn on the news on your computer and there's a random rumor today on Reddit or something about, I heard there's going to be robot dinosaurs in it. It's when 3 or 4 sources are telling you the same thing and they give you a context of, well, this is why there's a magic curse, that it isn't just someone thought of an entertaining rumor, but it sounds like this is a full story they're going with, albeit a very bad and offensive one. So just the fact that this painted a full picture of what they were doing somehow made it seem more likely to me than just robot dinosaurs, something you see is a rumor. This seemed to be a wider picture taking shape of it. As I said, the extra might have imperfect knowledge of the full story, so don't take this 100%. The telephone game, they might have had some of the details distorted. But what the extra said is that the children of the forest were originally black humans called this was a private message, text message. They said, oh, the name of these black humans is spelled Moarya. Think about that. That's how they tried to transliterate it, with that spelling. This set off alarm bells for me as soon as I saw it last week when LML forwarded it to me. Because, remember, as I said before in this same video, David J. Peterson's interview, he said that the name of the children of the forest for themselves is the Mora. This Trildar, I can't pronounce it well, but he said how to spell it. He said it's spelled Mohra, and it's pronounced, check out his podcast, he does it the right way, it has non-English sounds in it, but something like the Moria or something, even though it's spelled Mohra with this Trildar. Yeah, I can see how an extra who never saw it written down and just heard it on set verbally would get it distorted like that and try to spell it out as best they could, guessing at the spelling as Moarya. And if anything, this makes me think even more that this was a real extra who worked on the project. Like I said before, the reason I was leaning towards that this was an extra who really worked on it is they got some of the other details right. They knew there would be a wedding. The thing about the Starks actually being one of the wedding parties at Castle Rock actually made more sense. And particularly this, and specifically the fact that they got the spelling distorted. You see, if this was someone just making up a rumor who had seen the obscure interview Peterson gave back in November explaining they call themselves the Mora, spelled Mohra, if this was someone making up a rumor, they would have spelled it perfectly. They would have just copy-pasted the way Peterson spelled it. The fact that it makes it seem more legitimate to me that this was a low-level extra who wasn't a full speaking lines cast member, just someone on set, this sounds more like what they're claiming to be, that I was a low-level extra, and I overheard that the Children of the Forest are called this, and this is my attempt to transliterate it, and that they didn't get it exactly right. That make the rough edges around the report actually make it seem more legitimate, because you'd expect some fuzzy details and imperfect things. If you got this really accurate report, that's very unlikely. And, I gave a really accurate report on the Valyria prequel, but that's because, like I said, someone managed to get a copy of the series Bible and was showing it to me. And even then, my report probably isn't 100% accurate, because it's filtered through my perception of it. I didn't physically have the copy with me reading all 200 pages of it or something. So this sounds like an extra who was on set who misheard Mora and spelled it as best they could. So, that was alarm bells for me that, no, this is real. LML's source went on to explain the magical curse, and how it involves the Green Men, who they'd earlier said were part of the Stark and Casterly retinues at the wedding scene. And I'm talking with Lucerine's Lightbringer through private messages that, he's shocked too that he already made and put out this video saying the Green Men are in the show, and they seem to be like advisors to both parties. And the same source came back to him and said, well, actually the Green Men are responsible for the curse. And this ties into that really offensive thing. So just wow. According to the extra, might not have full understanding. In the story HBO presented, which I don't think Martin was doing, they said that the Children of the Forest had split into two factions. The Children of the Forest, who are the ones living in the wilderness, what we think of as Children of the Forest, and the Green Men, the magical priest guys with antler hats. The Green Men are a splinter faction of the Children of the Forest. He said that in their story, the split happened during the initial wars between the First Men and the Children of the Forest. The core faction of the Children kept fighting, but one faction realized that the First Men invaders were inevitably going to win, so they split off from the other children and allied with the First Men, turning on their own people by siding with the colonizers. And this faction of Children of the Forest that switched sides became the Green Men. Now, the Green Men remained magically powerful and in time became important advisors to the royal courts of the First Men. I guess this is how they're saying the religion of the old gods was eventually taken up by the First Men. They had their own religion before that, worshipping a god of storm and god of the sea. They switched to the religion of the Children of the Forest, and apparently because of these guys, I'm not sure. It didn't go into detail in that respect. But the Green Men were a splinter group of the Children of the Forest who allied with the First Men because they realized they were going to win. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, just as a book reader, because the entire reason the peace was made in the first place between the First Men and the Children, called the Pact, sealed on the Isle of Faces, is because all of the Children of the Forest realized it is physically impossible for us to win. We will have to settle for a negotiated truce. And the First Men realized, well, we could win, but it'll take generations, and it'll be so devastating, and the cost in blood will be so high. Just cooler heads prevailed and said, look, both sides will keep the land they already hold. The children will keep the deep forests, and we promise not to cut down any more sacred weirwoods. And we'll settle for a negotiated truce. And according to the legends given in the books, that no, the Green Men were created by the Pact as a symbol of that peace to guard the Isle of Faces, to symbolize the peace, they carved weirwood faces in every tree. That this idea that, oh no, it's about colonialism, that there's this group of quisling collaborator Children of the Forest who became the Green Men by siding with the First Men, that's silly. That is deeply contradicting things from the books. And admittedly, we know very little about the Green Men in the books. They've been mentioned 3 times, each time in intentionally vague, intentionally avoiding giving too much detail because they'll be important later. Still, this is not the impression we're getting from them. And I'll admit, it's possible, and there are fan theories, that the Green Men on the Isle of Faces are this surviving remnant of the Children of the Forest. That doesn't necessarily make them a splinter faction who turned on their own kind. That really contradicts what the rest of the story was. Things like, why are there Andals in the story of the Long Night? Or why are we shoving Land the Clever into it? This reeks of just stuff HBO is mashing together that doesn't make sense. Anyway, the extra told Lucifer Means Lightbringer. He went on to say that after the Children of the Forest split into these two factions, centuries of peace passed, that the children as we know them, who are called the Mora, they retreat into the deep forests, and the Green Men become advisors to the courts of the First Men. What kicks off the narrative of the Long Night, this extra said, is that a rogue Green Man magical priest, for some reason, broke ranks with the other Green Men and switched sides back to the Children of the Forest. They're the other faction of them, the ones that are still in the deep woods. So the Green Men split off from the Children of the Forest to side with the First Men, but then one of them went rogue and switched back. And he actually didn't mention the White Walkers, but the implication is that this rogue Green Man helped them have magical powers again. He mentioned something about the Children of the Forest losing their magical power, but the Green Men retaining it, which makes no sense. that seems like an invention on their part, but you get the impression that this rogue Green Man villain sided back with the indigenous people and started magical attacks on the First Men, like reactivating the White Walkers and stuff. Actually, what the extra specifically claimed this rogue Green Man did as his first act was to help the Children of the Forest call down the Hammer of the Waters. Because according to legend, the children used their magics to call down this huge tidal wave that tried to sever the neck of Westeros, the isthmus between the north and the rest of Westeros, and all it succeeded in doing was flooding the neck and turning it into a swamp. That didn't really work. And again, I'm not sure if this rumor is true or the Extra fully understands what's happening. So, they said, Green Men are a splinter group of the children that sided with the First Men, but then later a rogue Green Man switched back to their side and helped them call down the Hammer of the Waters, or start the Long Night or something. And that as punishment, this is how the curse happens, as punishment, the remaining Green Men who stay loyal to the white settlers call down a magical curse on the Children of the Forest, turning them all into green-skinned, non-human creature elf guys. That's how the curse is going to happen. And, yeah, that sounds plausible. Matching what I was just told there was a magical curse. That sounds like not too far-fetched, like robot dinosaurs. That sounds like something HBO would slap together, simplistically. So just, wow. Now we come to the last big section of this report video, in which I'm going to give a summary of all the casting information that we ever heard about the Long Night pilot. Given that they didn't tell us anything about the story, this is the most raw information that we have to go on. Though, it's shallow. It's mostly just lists of actor names, and we have no idea who they were playing. So, despite its size, I'm going to try and move through it pretty quickly. There were two big official casting announcements by HBO. Formal press releases where they announced a burst of half a dozen starring cast members. These two big waves. Wave 1 was in January 2019, and Wave 2 was in March 2019. I already made analysis videos on those. They're in the same playlist as this. Check those out if you want to do more research, because they delved into speculation on casting sheets and announcements. For this video, I've concentrated that down to the core facts, because I already reported on it a year ago. However, in this specific video, I really want to get to all the new information we have on everyone else we found out about over time, months apart. Just a report here, a report there, everyone ranging from this is probably just a guest star who's Bob the Farmer versus this sounds like a relatively important character that they just found late in the casting process and they missed the official waves, which can happen. So everyone else that they found out about over time, I have lumped together as an unofficial Wave 3. But Wave 3 stretches across months, so keep in mind that wasn't a formal announcement, and I'll talk about this more when I get to it. Their importance might be variable. Some of them do seem important, though. Actually, to start at the beginning, there was an initial Wave 0 of sorts. The very first casting announcements they made were back at the end of October of 2018. Then on October 30th, 2018, HBO announced that they'd cast A-list movie actress Naomi Watts, the first person cast in it. And ever since then, the show was hyped up as just the Naomi Watts prequel, more than a show adapting a narrative from the works of George R.R. Martin, which is Richard Plepler's HBO in peak form, pandering to celebrity culture, this boutique red carpet culture. I said before, I think they picked this show mostly because they wanted brand name recognition, main characters named Stark and Lannister, and latch on to White Walker hype. For a time there around Christmas 2018, in the news, it felt like the Naomi Watts hype had exceeded the White Walker hype, A lot of this, I think, is just news sites needed to say something about it. And a lot of them I don't even blame that, well, what picture are we going to use for it? Well, they've announced one big cast member, Naomi Watts, and a couple of other people we haven't heard as much about outside of Britain. You'd see a news article with a picture of Naomi Watts, and okay, it's August now, that was 8 months ago, and they're filming, and you didn't tell us anything more than, it stars Naomi Watts. And it was starting to wear out, the hype for that. That it was White Walker hype, and for a time, the celebrity hype of, oh my god, Naomi Watts, it felt even bigger. That they'd have done the same thing with insert Oscar-winning actress name here, like Nicole Kidman or something. Please talk about this in the comments, just how annoying it got that they treated it as the Naomi Watts show. And like, she'd go on talk shows, couldn't really say anything about it. She showed up at their post-Emmys party at the end of 2019, actually. Like, we're passing the torch. Turns out they weren't. It was a terrible idea. Just how much that dominated everything. And that was no accident. HBO, Richard Plepler's HBO, which no longer exists, they had stripped it down to its core essence, what they always wanted. Not even ignoring the books of George R. R. Martin. We don't even need fantasy names, dialogue, costumes. It's the show in their minds is celebrity actors on the red carpet. The rest is just supporting that. That ate up a lot of attention on October 30th, but in the shadow of that, the very next day, on October 31st, they also announced that they cast actor Josh Whitehouse. And then Wave 1 wasn't for, the next half a dozen people weren't for 2 months. So these two people that they announced individually, and first, we assumed that both of them were playing very important characters. But here's an interesting new piece of information that came out after it was announced that Long Night was canceled. A couple of months later, after the cancellation, Josh Whitehouse was giving an interview, and he briefly said, without giving any specific information, he revealed that he hadn't actually filmed a single scene for the pilot. Simply because the way the story is structured, his character doesn't appear in episode 1. Which is interesting. You know, I can see that. There's shows that are structured like that, where you meet the core cast gradually, interspersed over a couple of episodes, meeting all of them. Or think of Game of Thrones, how there were a couple of relatively important characters that they couldn't rationally fit into the Winterfell feast at the beginning. Like Renly's on the Small Council, or Littlefinger are introduced later, but they're actually really important characters. Another example I'd use is, think in Star Wars terms. If Star Wars was adapted as a TV show, Han Solo wouldn't be in the first episode. Because I saw this whole breakdown of this. Han Solo shows up 45 minutes into A New Hope. That he isn't in Act 1. He's what kicks off Act 2 to inject new energy into it. And that's actually a great idea. You know, it's not wearing out. You're meeting new people. It keeps the plot flowing, makes it interesting. But if A New Hope was, you know, the first entry in a TV show, like episode 1 would end with Luke's farm being burned and returning to Obi-Wan and saying, I want to be a Jedi, and then them leaving. Like, you wouldn't meet Han in the first episode. A lot of shows are structured like that, where you meet the ensemble gradually. Even so, he was apparently such an important character that you announced him paired with Naomi Watts months before the main wave of the rest of the cast, and he wasn't in the first episode. For some reason. Make of that what you will. There's a couple of alternate explanations, each of them equally plausible. But on to the formal casting waves. Wave 1 was January 2019. Georgie Henley, Naomi Ackie, Sheila Atim, Ivano Jeremiah, Jamie Campbell Bower, Denise Goff, Alex Sharp, and Toby Regbo. Georgie Henley was actually Lucy in the Chronicles of Narnia movies, and Naomi Ackie was recently in Star Wars. She was that former stormtrooper in Rise of Skywalker. And Jamie Campbell Bower, I feel so bad for him, that he now has the dubious distinction of appearing in 2 canceled Game of Thrones pilots. He was in the original pilot for Game of Thrones. He was the first Waymar Royce, the ranger that gets killed by White Walkers in the prologue. But then they had to go back and refilm the pilot. They refilmed 90% of it, and they shifted the CGI on the White Walker design. They had to redo almost all of it. So they had to refilm those scenes, by which point in time he had a scheduling conflict and couldn't return, so they had to recast the role. I feel bad for him. George R. R. Martin has spoken highly of him in his blog post, saying, "Oh, hooray, Bauer is in this. He was in the first pilot. I liked him." So, I hope he gets onto one of the other prequels eventually for all of just getting shot down twice like that. Then came Casting Wave 2 in March 2019. Miranda Richardson, John Sim, Marquis Rodriguez, Richard McCabe, John Heffernan, and Dixie Edgerix. Richardson's been in a lot of stuff. I know her best from Blackadder. And John Sim was, of course, amazing as the Master on Doctor Who. For a time I wondered if, given his reputation as a trickster, playing trickster characters, I thought maybe he'd be playing Lan the Clever, and then I thought, well, no, it sounds like they're going for the origin of these characters. Lan would be younger, maybe Jamie Campbell Bower is playing him, but that comes into just speculation based on stereotypes of roles these actors have played before, so for all we know, one of the other ones is playing Lan the Clever. And Marquis Rodriguez is important, because he's literally the only actor who matches the physical description for one of the main characters described in the first set of casting sheets. I'm not going to read off all the casting sheets in detail like I did in the separate videos for Wave 1 and 2, but short version is this. Even before the Long Night prequel, in the late seasons of Game of Thrones, HBO wanted to stop fans from guessing who people were playing by just giving out their names. So when they put out casting sheets to agencies, they would assign them alphanumeric code names. So instead of saying this person is Harry Strickland, they get code names like M3 or S2 and so forth. And we're reasonably sure these were assigned at random, like we don't think S1 and S2 had anything to do with each other. Well, the first big casting sheet that we got in fall of 2018 was for 4 characters who we thought, well, this is the first casting sheet, they must be very important. Characters codenamed A, S, I, and F. And fans quickly noticed, ASIF, that's the acronym for the book series, A Song of Ice and Fire. So because they came out first, and because it seemed to be an important acronym, we got the impression that these were very important characters, not just starring, because, Game of Thrones is a show that has 24 starring cast members, but core characters, the core 7, like Jon Snow scale or Tyrion scale character. Now, all these casting sheets gave was physical descriptions based on 3 factors: race, gender, and age. So I broke them down into 4 groupings based on the first 2. And as noted before, they suspiciously only cast Caucasian actors and black actors, no other races. So no Asian actors, because apparently no one's from Yee, not even like Mediterranean or Latino. They wouldn't have Roinar people in it. The literally one exception was for codename A, one of the first 4 who we think were really important. Mixed race, male, age 17 to 22, series regular. Marquis Rodriguez is the only cast member who could plausibly match that description. No other male non-white actor was even in that age range. Obviously, the more unique casting calls are the ones we can kind of narrow down to specific actors, like mixed race, or the very young, the very old. So, if there's only 2 or 3 20-something black female roles, you can narrow that down. Or, in one case, they asked for white male in his 50s, and they only cast 2 actors in that age range who were also white male. So I could kind of narrow that one down too, where I think McCabe was playing this other thing, but in other ones it's more difficult. But mixed race 17 to 22, the only person even close to that was Marquis Rodriguez, so I'm pretty sure he's playing A. And similarly, when you come to category black female for these roles that are listed, S and F, and in that age range, the only people remotely matching were Naomi Ackie playing S, and Sheila Atim playing F. I'm reasonably sure on that. Similarly, among the announced regular cast members, Georgie Henley was probably codename I, white female aged 17 to 25, and she's 23. She's the only person matching that. Like, Naomi Watts is 50. She's not going to be I. And other people were either a teenager or in their 30s. So we got lucky in this case that, yeah, just looking at this casting sheet versus who they actually announced, I'm reasonably sure these four actors were playing A, S, I, and F. Rodriguez, Ackie, Atim, and Henley. But, contrast this with casting sheets that said white male in his 30s. That was futile. I mean, like I said, it's either some unique non-white role in a show that's mostly white because it's medieval Britain, fantasy medieval Britain, or a very young role or a very old role. But white male in his 30s, actually think of how many people in Game of Thrones that could describe. Even then, it was odd that most of the white male casting sheet roles were saying a role in their 30s, but most of the people they announced, like Jamie Campbell Bower, Toby Regbo, were in their 20s. So we never found out who a lot of these white male in his 30s people actually were, who was playing them. That's strange, and I have no answer for that. I do need to stress that some actors don't match any of the descriptions in the casting sheets, nor is this unusual. Important roles are often hand-picked, like Peter Dinklage in Game of Thrones was hand-picked to play Tyrion Lannister. So if an actor that they've announced doesn't match any of the casting calls, that just means there wasn't an open audition for it. It either means they were hand-picked, or they might have had 2 or 3 candidates who had a private audition. But because of that, there weren't casting sheets sent out to, agencies because of that. Case in point, Naomi Watts herself doesn't really match the physical descriptions of any casting call. White female, age 50, there was never a casting sheet for that. Which is fine, this is to be expected. Now we come to the new casting info I haven't reported on before in any prior video, which I'm lumping together here as Wave 3 as a placeholder title, even though they were never formally announced. There was never a formal announcement wave. This is just everyone we found out about as they were filming. We heard about them in dribs and drabs before the pilot finished, sometimes before they filmed, sometimes during filming. Sometimes they were relatively prominent in our news feed on news sites. It would say, this person has been cast. Some of these we just found out about because their names started appearing on the IMDb page one day, and they're probably a background character. Then everything got canceled. But much later, months later after that, in July of 2020, Redanian Intelligence posted a big new casting report that they claim to have, through their business contacts, found out the names of each of the characters these Wave 3 actors were playing. So I'm integrating all of these separate reports into one big list called Wave 3, and rather than repeat myself and go through chronological order of, we found out about this person a year before, but much later we found out their name, I'm going to tell you the name of the actor and then the name of the character from this later report, regardless of the order we discovered all this in. So I'm just going to rattle this off really quickly. And there's 2 we never found out character names for, that could mean anything, but I'll address that. Start with Leah and Mary Gayer, who were playing twins named Sarah and Vera. Amy McPherson, who was, according to the report, playing a character named Aurelia. And IMDb was already calling her Aurelia long before the Redanian Intelligence report. Then Georgina Beadle, who was playing Flavia. Rosie McEwen, whose character was allegedly Ianthe. Jacqueline Boatswain is one of the 2 we don't have a character name for, but she strongly matches the physical description for someone who in the casting sheets was called S2. I'll explain that later. Then Georgina Campbell, whose character is apparently named Sorcha, and Jasper Britton, whose character is reportedly named Housemaster Cole. Sean Rigby, character name Reynard, Ewan Bailey playing a Dungeon Keep. He's credited as Dungeon Keep. And the last person is, they never found out the name of Set Sjöstrand's character, or if he even had a name, or is just a featured guardsman with speaking lines or something. So maybe he's a background character. So you see, I can't glean any meaning from these names in and of themselves. They're too generic. Maybe Reynard was Reynard Casterly or something, but they left his surname off the casting sheet to prevent plot leaks. Or maybe it's a code name. I'm going to go through the rest of this assuming Reynard is his real first name, and maybe they left off his last name. Or maybe he's just some peasant who doesn't have one. But that was Reynard. Some of these are really specific, like Housemaster Cole. Is that like a precursor to the Maesters, or is he just like a housemaster in that he's the guy that runs the kitchens? That could mean anything. Or Aurelia. And looking for simple patterns or familiarity in these names, none of these names really match the standard naming conventions and styles that run in the Stark family, or the Lannister family, or the Casterlys. I mean, a name like Flavia doesn't really match anything in the setting. So I can't really say that's more of a Stark name or more of a Lannister name. However, other than the racial casting stuff from the casting sheets, which I'm saving that for last, there were two other points of interest in Redanian intelligence report. They said they actually managed to find more detailed descriptions for two of these characters, just a little more specific. First, Amy McPherson, who was playing a character named Aurelia, was actually supposed to be playing a daughter of Naomi Watts' character. They didn't find out the name of Naomi Watts' character or any other details about their family, their location, or even other members. And for all we know, this Aurelia is just a daughter, not the only child of Naomi Watts. To be blunt, for all we know, Aurelia is the Rickon Stark of this family. Second point, we'd already heard that actress Leah Gayer was one of several new cast members. We'd actually heard about her months before they even started filming. And quite separately, in the months leading up to filming, we had heard Redanian intelligence reports from casting sheets saying they were looking for pairs of real-life identical twins. And at one point that they were looking for triplets. That's interesting. Well, and we didn't find this out until a full year later, after I had heard the name Leah Gayer for the first time. Only after it was canceled did I learn, yes, Leah Gayer has a twin sister, Mary Gayer, who was also part of the cast. I only found out about this after it was canceled, that her twin was also in it. We're just learning this. And given the rarity of triplets, maybe they were supposed to be pulling extra duty for a third sister as a character, shared between them, that the two of them would play two sisters and alternate between the third one in camera takes. Or maybe they wanted triplets because they'd need one to fill in when the other one wasn't there. I'm not sure, and maybe that triplet report wasn't real. But yes, they cast identical twin sisters in this. And Redanian intelligence said their names were Sarah and Vera. Sarah with a C. One or two news sites like winteriscoming.net or one of the other ones wanted to read into this more, saying, wow, there's an AE in Sarah. Maybe she's Valyrian. Why, she must be Valyrian. Even though George R. R. Martin himself repeatedly said, there are no Valyrians in this. There are no dragons in this. And people were just in denial that they picked such a weird prequel idea that has no Valyrians in it. Other names in Westeros have an AE in them, if you've read through the World of Ice and Fire source book. Even from the core regions of Westeros, it's not that unusual. I mean, think about what we do know. That the Starks and Casterlys are in it, and that the Lannisters are sort of an offshoot of the Casterlys. This is the origin story of the Lannisters. The Lannisters are famously a family that is prone to having twins. Jaime and Cersei, or during the Dance of the Dragons, you'll see this in House of the Dragon, which has been greenlit. The current Lord of House Lannister is Lord Jason, and his twin brother Tyland is the Master of Coin. Their family runs to twins. So, I mean, Sarah, Cersei, both spelled with a C, a soft C like that, as part of a naming scheme. Some people latched on to the AE. The fact that it has a C pronounced the way that Cersei's C is pronounced, and that they're twins, I'm actually leaning more towards that I think these may have been Casterlys. That's just a guess. And even then, maybe they weren't prominent Casterlys. Maybe they're background, not important characters. You know, clearly they're not part of the regular cast. Maybe they're just in the background somewhere. I strongly suspect that actors who weren't officially announced by HBO in those first two public casting waves, where it even said in their descriptions, series regular, just the ones we found out about eventually that I lumped together as Wave 3 here, I suspect that people listed in Wave 3 probably weren't very important. They weren't starring. However, next section here, the new report from Redanian intelligence actually did claim to know the names of two starring cast members who were in Wave 2. And it's announced, series regular in their description. Richard McCabe, who's a very experienced and respected theater actor, was, according to their report, playing a character named Robin, spelled Robben. And young Dixie Edgerix was playing a character named Maeve, spelled unusually Maiev. Again, I have no idea what to make of all this for any of the names in Redanian Intelligence's big report. Maybe they left off their surnames because it would reveal what houses they belong to. Or maybe even their first names are just code names for these purposes, and he's not really named Robin or Sarah in the actual pilot. We don't know. And they might not have been the most important of characters. It's hard to judge exactly how prominent they were. Finally, big section here, we come to the black child actors that Redanian Intelligence's big new report in July 2020 said were cast as Children of the Forest. We never even heard any of these child actors were attached to the show before, much less that Redanian Intelligence just came out and said, hey, there's all these new actors, they're all black children, they're all playing Children of the Forest, and we even have names for them, and this specific one is playing Leaf, who will then recur to meet Bran Stark thousands of years later. We never heard of any of these child actors attached to it. I mean, like Leah Gayer, a couple of the other background people, we had heard the actor name attached to it, and they're in IMDb before filming even started. It's just over half a year after it was finished and canceled, we suddenly heard them saying they knew from casting information these actors were playing them. With just a lot of information dumped on us all at once, this big revelation back in July. And I already mentioned the first three, and that there was a fourth one who was credited as Enclave Boy, as whatever their crediting system was. Maybe he had a name in the actual episode, we're not sure. I mentioned the first four, but there was actually a fifth black child actor, Gabriela Morales, who is credited as Princess Double. I don't think that means she's just the filming double for some other child actor we haven't heard of yet. Was she Leaf's double, and Leaf is a princess of a tribe? I don't... princess of what? Like literally a princess, or the chief's daughter of some mountain tribe? Or is princess just a code name? We don't know, but it says double, so I think she was attached to some other role we never found out about. One point I do want to bring up related to the leak rumor that the Children of the Forest are black humans presented without prosthetics who later get magically cursed into elf guys. Don't take my word for it, think on this. You know There are child labor laws that strictly limit the number of hours that child actors can be on set. But the heavy prosthetics for things like White Walkers or Children of the Forest, those prosthetics take many hours to apply. You've all seen the behind-the-scenes stuff. Oh, I have to come in at 4 a.m. It takes 4 hours to put all this makeup on these prosthetic pieces. With an entire team from the makeup department doing it, is a really involved prosthetic makeup process. If, according to Redanian intelligence, not me, but a respected news site is saying this black girl was playing Leaf, the child of the forest, if they were playing them, that's another reason to doubt that the children of the forest would appear as non-humans wearing prosthetics. That you wouldn't expect a child to have to go through the prosthetic process like that. It's another hint, not a solid piece of evidence, but a hint that they're humans who are magically cursed. That this, I don't know if there's any way to contact these people and they don't have Twitter or anything, of you wouldn't have a child playing a prosthetics heavy role, and this implies the children of the forest didn't have prosthetics in this. What were they doing? So that's everyone that was listed in the new Wave 3, and the new character names, which I can't glean that much from. Still, in my earlier analysis videos on Waves 1 and 2, I tried to see if any of these actors matched the physical descriptions of roles they listed off in the casting calls. Like how I matched up A, S, I, and F to those 4 actors from the first 2 casting waves. So, okay, do any of the actors from Wave 3 match up to the physical descriptions for casting sheets that we got? A few do seem to match. Remember I said Jacqueline Boatswain and S2? Under Black Female, S2 is described as being a black woman in her 40s to 60s. And Jacqueline Boatswain is the only actor remotely fitting that description. And I'm not even the first one to notice this. Redanian intelligence, in their report, when she was first announced independently, it was before July, it was like when they were still filming, they announced, oh, she has joined the cast, and Redanian intelligence pointed out, wow, she matches the physical description for S2. So I'm not the only one to notice this. And as I said, I think Naomi Aki was playing S, and Sheila Atim was playing F. Does this mean that Boatswain's character was related to Aki's character somehow? Was she her mother, an aunt, maybe just a teacher, or a trusted friend? A mentor figure? There's no way to tell. Is there any relationship between S and S2, or are the alphanumeric code names assigned purely at random? So far, they've been random, so I don't know. I also want to point out that while the leak was that all Children of the Forest are played by black people, not necessarily all black people in the show would be playing Children of the Forest. We got this one set photo of Georgina Campbell in costume at the Italy set with Naomi Watts, seemingly in the same style as Naomi Watts, with this toga-like thing. I don't think that's what the pre-transformation Children of the Forest looked like. I mean, they're still described as basically forest dwellers. So maybe there are a few exceptions here. I mean, they say her character is named Sorcha, and why is she at the wedding scene? Maybe she is from the Eastern Continent. I don't know, but not every black person was playing a child of the forest, but most of them were. That was the majority of the cast. As for black male, the casting sheets actually did put out a call for 2 black male child actors, which before there weren't any child actors, so I couldn't tell. Now with Wave 3 from this report, casting sheets we had said they were looking for L2 and W2. And the description was 2 confident young black actors, ages 6 and 10. I have no idea why they used the word confident in that. But looking at these child actors we just learned about from the Redanian intelligence report, Palumi was listed as playing a child of the forest named Cloud, and he is around 10 years old, and Amasa is credited as Enclave Boy, who is closer to 6. But if they bother to put out a casting call for him, shouldn't he have a name and not just be Enclave Boy? That sounds like a description for a background extra. I'm not sure. It seemed like L2 and W2 would be more than background characters because they said confident. Or maybe neither of these two guys are L2 and W2. I'm not sure. But there were points where there were casting sheets for black male 6 and 10. As for Caucasian male, as I said, the roles in their mid-30s sounded so generic, and there are so many I can't begin to match them to anything. Though I suspect that Richard McCabe, as a starring cast member, might be playing V2, who is described as series regular, given that the character is stated to be in his 50s and he's older than the rest of the pack there. But there's two men in the cast who are in their 50s who could have plausibly matched that, so I'm not really sure. And last we come to Caucasian Female again. Wave 3 introduced 5 new white actresses. 2 of them twins, and all are in their mid-20s, which is so generic that I can't really match it to any of the code names in the casting sheets. Maybe one of them was playing F2 or M3. But what's the significance of that? I really can't glean more from it just based on their physical age that we didn't already know. So there's 5 of them, I can't tell. But there is one final point I do feel comfortable speculating on, which involves a Caucasian female. So I'll branch off into that from here. So I'm done with the casting report section. This is the final kind of speculative section stemming from that. I think we can speculate on which of these actresses may have been playing the Stark Princess described in LML's leak. The Stark Princess who is also a Greenseer and the bride at the big wedding scene, according to his leak anyway. I strongly suspect that, again, the qualifier, if all of this is true, I strongly suspect that the Greenseer Stark Princess was actually played by Georgie Henley. This is based on the logic that this would be such a prominent role, it's a Stark, that she was probably one of the series regulars that were announced in Wave 1 and Wave 2, not in Wave 3. That's probably for more background characters like your Rickon Stark, or even a Roderick Cassell from Episode 1 in the pilot. He's still not a very prominent character in it. Background people, like the Cassells. The fact that HBO made these official announcement events for the first 2 waves implies they're the really important series regulars. So ruling out Wave 3, who in Waves 1 or 2 could be this Stark Princess that we just heard about from these new leaks? Well, it's got to be a Caucasian female from Waves 1 and 2. Which ones of those are of marriageable age? In a medieval society where the purpose of marriage is to produce children to cement a political alliance. Well, not Miranda Richardson, she's 60 years old and beyond childbearing age. You see, I'm ruling that out. Similarly, Naomi Watts is 50 years old. More likely to be someone's mother than a bride herself. And on top of that, I'm not trying to be ageist, the leaker did say she's a young latent Greenseer, like Bran Stark. She's not middle-aged. It described her as young. And someone for a young bride for a political alliance. So even Denise Goff, who was actually 39 years old when they filmed the pilot, I think would also be outside the age range of a young bride, particularly a medieval young bride. So by mere process of elimination, because there weren't that many white females in Waves 1 and 2, ruling out those 3, that leaves only 2. Georgie Henley and Dixie Edgerix, who was too young, only 14 years old when the pilot filmed, below marriageable age. Well, this brings up censorship laws and such and those issues, like they had to age up Daenerys in the Game of Thrones pilot specifically because censorship laws in the UK forbid portraying characters having sex who are younger than 16, regardless of the actor's actual age in real life. That you can't have a 23-year-old unconvincingly playing a 15-year-old having sex. That is illegal. You seriously think we were going to see a 14-year-old actress getting married? That's young even by Westeros standards. I mean, if she's had her blood already, Dany is married that young, but it's considered pushing it a little, though not creepy. But they famously had to age up Daenerys, and by extension all the other characters, pushing back the date of Robert's Rebellion by 2 years because she has sex on her wedding night and her birth date is tied to the end of the war because her father died in it. They had to age her up to 16, all of that stuff. So Edrix is too young. She was 14 when they filmed this. And there are 3 other pieces of incidental evidence that point to Georgie Henley. First, we have a cast Instagram post from during the filming phase that they took at their hotel room in Italy. And like we said, Italy was probably the Casterly Rock set. Based on the spy photos we got, we saw Naomi Watts dressed up in a costume that looked like the finery you'd wear at a wedding. Georgie Henley is in this Instagram photo, confirming that she was at the Italy shoot, at what was probably the wedding scene. I don't see any other major white female actors in this photo. Now, granted, just because we don't see them in this one photo doesn't mean Dixie Edrix wasn't there at all. I mean, Naomi Watts isn't in this photo, but we saw from spy photos she was at Italy. That doesn't prove anything. Still, it confirms that Georgie Henley was at the Italy shoot. Second point, and this is admittedly subjective and not real evidence, but discuss this in the comments. Georgie Henley actually looks like a northerner. It looks like someone you would cast to resemble the other Stark actors. That Westeros is a fantasy version of medieval Britain, right? And the Starks of the North are loosely based on Northern England. And, they prominently feature Northern English accents, and their ruler was Sean Bain as Ned Stark. And they generally tried to cast actors for that have broader, more rounded northern looks to their face than the sharp and angular aquiline features of the Lannisters. I realize all this is subjective and circumstantial, but looking up her biography, the point is, Georgie Henley is outright from Northern England. She's from Yorkshire and looks like a northerner. You could see this person being a relative of Maisie Williams or Ned Stark. And she looks like that. So, I don't know, debate this, the exact appearance in the comments. It's just, Naomi Watts doesn't look like a Stark to the same extent that Georgie Henley does. But I'm just lumping that on as additional circumstantial evidence, not something to rest the foundation on. Third point, there was this other thing in LML's report from that extra, which I didn't include in any formal write-up, and keep in mind, I'm barely mentioning here because I think they heard it wrong. That it's more of a vague rumor that the extra had heard, because there's no way they could have seen this. They couldn't have known it firsthand. Because they were, an extra would be around filming on set, and it was a rumor about how the wedding was going to be edited. Okay? Now, on top of that, this isn't something LML told me in private. Go back and check his video. He mentions this in his public video report, in the public live stream. So, maybe this is something, but maybe the extra only half heard it, or it got embellished as it spread from one person to the next. Whatever. So even though I'm giving this a lot of build-up, I'm giving you caution of why don't put that much stock into this, but it sounds possible. Okay, the rumor was that the pilot episode ends by actually showing the wedding night scene between the Stark princess and the last Casterly. And I find that entirely believable. I mean, they had a wedding night scene with Drogo and Daenerys in the pilot of Game of Thrones, right? And hey, what better way to pander sex and nudity in a show than by putting it in the first episode, right? Maybe it was handled tastefully. I like to think it was handled tastefully. We're all adults. These are adult shows. I think it was handled tastefully, given that it has a female showrunner and the director of this pilot was a woman. So I don't get the sense that even if there was sex in this, we have reason to believe it was gratuitous. But the fact remains, there's no way in hell that UK censorship laws would let them have a wedding night scene, even a tasteful one, not really showing anything. Like no on-screen nudity, just implying it with clothes falling around a close-up of their feet, showing that their clothes are falling off. Even if done tastefully like that, simply implying that a 14-year-old character is having sex, there is no way in hell UK censorship laws would have allowed that. You can't do that. So given the rumor that it actually shows the wedding night at the end of the episode, there is no way that 14-year-old Dixie Edgerix was playing the young Stark princess. And by process of elimination, we're left with Georgie Henley, a 23-year-old actress in the wedding night scene, which is fine. Well, actually, the reason I kept saying, I'm so hesitant to talk about this, I think this next part got embellished with the retelling, and there's no way the extra could know this. The extra said, and this is in LML's public video, so you can check that out, the rumor was that the pilot episode ends with this meteor shower that ushers in the long night, right? And the meteor shower darkens the sky, and with the impact and all this dust going around, the sky is so hazy that it appears that the moon turns blood red, hence the series name Bloodmoon. Well, the rumor that the extra heard, second or third hand, was that the wedding night scene would be intercut with the meteor shower, intercut with the Bloodmoon sequence. Much like how Jon Snow and Daenerys' boat sex scene in the season 7 finale was interposed with the wall being breached by the White Walkers. So this was, supposed to interpose or intercut her deflowered virginal wedding night blood spreading on the sheets with the moon turning blood red or something in a montage. As I said, that's just a rumor, and do not hold them to that, because this is a rumor of a rumor, okay? And, I mean, the extra had no way of knowing this. I mean, the extra was only filming physical things on set. If this was how they were going to edit it in post-production, they could have only heard a rumor of that. They wouldn't have seen the finished product. They wouldn't have seen the CGI meteor shower. So, on a certain level, yeah, the meteor strike would happen at the end of the episode. And if there's a big wedding scene in the middle of the episode, logically, the wedding night would happen closer to the end of it around the same time as the meteor strike. And maybe it wasn't a montage. Maybe it was just juxtaposing them by having one immediately following the other. So I think I'm reading too much into that. I don't think it was quite like the Danny-John boat sex scene. And again, I think the story grew in the telling. So disregard this, just that there was a rumor of that. But we know there's a wedding scene in it, much like Dany Drogo, and the Dany Drogo wedding ended with seeing their wedding night sex in that pilot episode. Given that you can't have a 14-year-old actress in a sex scene like that in UK censorship laws, this points to Georgie Henley by process of elimination. But these are just circumstantial factors. Well, they probably would show the wedding night. She kind of looks like a northerner, that Georgie Henley was at the Italy shoot where the wedding scene was filmed. That's circumstantial. The big thing for me is just process of elimination. I consider the biggest evidence of Georgie Henley playing the Stark Princess to be that such a character was probably so important that this Stark Princess would be in those first two casting waves. And the only person in the first two casting waves of a marriageable age was codename I, white female, early 20s. And Georgie Henley is the only actor in those first two waves that even remotely matches the physical description of codename I. Not the 50-year-old Naomi Watts, and not a 14-year-old either. So I think they wanted Lucy Pevensey to be this major Stark character. All that aside, this prequel was a travesty And I feel really bad for all these actors. I mean, they got so hyped up on, we're going to be in the next Game of Thrones. And then they actually saw what it was like. And they have all these NDAs now. They can't talk about it too much yet. But I hope that on the scale of the next decade, some of them eventually find their way into other Game of Thrones prequel projects that are being discussed. Like, I hope they're not discouraged by all this, and that as a reward for their suffering, some of them wind up in House of the Dragon, or some of the other prequels that might come down the road. Jamie Campbell Bower has already been in 2 failed pilots. I really hope he tries again for House of the Dragon. Well, because he has that Lannister look to him. I hope he's Thailand or something. Well, share your thoughts in the comments. Are there any characters from the Dance of the Dragons era, off the top of your head, that you think some of these actors could play? Like, would Naomi Ackie make a good Nettles? Actually, no, because Nettles is 16. She's too old already. Things like that. Just, of these actors, who do you think they could play in House of the Dragon that you hope they apply for? This is going to be my last update on the Long Night pilot for the foreseeable future, until such time as we get a huge news leak giving a lot more detail on what the plot was actually like. Cast members speaking out, a big dump of concept art, or even a leaked script that we can confirm coming out from somewhere. I don't see that happening in the immediate future. Thank you for everyone who was following my channel through my regular updates from when they pitched this and I said this is why it's a bad idea, through my filming reports last summer, just my regular core subscribers. Thank you for this journey we went on, and just seeing this unfold like it did for the past 2 years. That I don't see any regular updates until something huge happens. If you hear about it, I will of course report on it. But it's got to be something big, not if, oh, we found some other minor actor who was in it, but we don't really know who they were playing. I'm not going to make a video on that. If it's something really big, but I think we've found out as much as we could for now. By the way, I actually did try to track down archived copies of the script for the Long Night prequel pilot, but it didn't work out. First, I tried contacting the WGA library again in Los Angeles, the Writers Guild archives, where I got that Daenerys script for Season 8. But they politely explained to me, writing back my contacts there, they said their institution only archives scripts that have officially aired as TV episodes, that they explicitly do not archive the scripts for pilot episodes. It's some contractual thing. So because this was a pilot that never went to full series, it'll never be part of the WGA archives. So that's a dead end. Then I took it a step further, and I tried to email the university library where George R.R. Martin sends archived copies of all of his projects and scripts, to see if they had a copy of the Long Night script. That's Cushing Memorial Library at Texas A&M. They have a whole section of stuff George R.R. Martin donated to them over the years. And this is how, a few years ago, reporters managed to get a copy of the original script for the first Game of Thrones pilot, or at least one version of it. We think they went through a couple of revisions. It might not have been the shooting script, but it was a version of it. That Martin had deposited a copy of the pilot script for Game of Thrones into their archive of his works. So I thought, well, maybe he sent them a copy of the Long Night script. So I set up an account through their library website, and I mailed a formal request, interlibrary loan, to their library staff. But they went and checked, and they wrote back to me, again, politely, that George R.R. Martin has simply never submitted a copy of the script, or hasn't submitted one yet. Given how little he was involved in writing this pilot on any level, I mean, by his own admission, he was almost totally out of the loop on it. They heard some of his suggestions and didn't even feel beholden to them. It's possible that Martin doesn't even want to send a copy of the pilot script to his official archives at Texas A&M. because he doesn't consider it one of his works. Worse yet, what if they never even sent Martin a copy of this script because they totally cut him out of the loop? That's another possibility. More probably, I think, is that HBO is strictly enforcing its non-disclosure agreements, and any attempt by Martin to admit what this cancelled nightmare of a project was really like, such as sending the script to a public archive, is being actively suppressed. But I checked everywhere I could. I checked 2 different archives. I tried. I hope it leaks out somehow, because a lot of people are exposed to this thing. This is all of the information I was able to put together about what was actually going on with this mysterious Long Night prequel that no one asked for. HBO's attempt to make their own Game of Thrones prequel, this Frankenstein, they slapped together with no input from George R.R. Martin, that he never wanted, just ripping off the tropes of his world on a surface level to push some brand name recognition. Names like Stark, Lannister, and White Walker. Truly think back to the aftermath of Season 7, late 2017, early 2018, when they were picking what pilot they would make, from which prequel, just how huge the blind hype for the TV show's White Walkers had gotten in the break between Season 7 and 8. I'm still hyped for the book White Walkers because they're still cool, just not the gimmicky cliches the TV show writers turned them into. There is no Night King in the books. I asked George R. R. Martin himself once in his blog, when you see in wikis and stuff him saying there is no Night King, that was from when I did that. There is no stereotypical fantasy Dark Lord in this. In many ways, I feel like the Long Night prequel, and the fact that HBO tried to make it at the expense of the real prequels that Martin had actually made prequel texts on, like Dance of the Dragons or something, the Long Night prequel felt like the embodiment of everything HBO did to the A Song of Ice and Fire novels across 8 seasons with Game of Thrones, condensed into one pilot. The embodiment of HBO's attitude from Season 5 onwards, heck, since the beginning, that they didn't really need George R. R. Martin. And we hear more about this every day with all these other interviews coming out where Martin said just, even day 1 on Season 1 of Game of Thrones, I came to the set, no one was asking me questions, I was just a guest on the adaptation of my own book. That I was out of the loop since the beginning. If you thought I was involved, even when he was writing scripts, he was a screenwriter for Seasons 1 through 4. He wrote 1 episode a season. They weren't really asking him things. This is the American Tolkien, and he's still alive, and you're making a TV series of his works, and you think you know better than him. Basic ideas, not even just logistics, we can't have that expensive thing there. Really crazy things on character interpretation. They didn't think they needed George R. R. Martin. They felt they didn't even need his story or his characters. They didn't need Arya, book Arya, the coherent fictional character anymore. There is no TV Arya in opposition to that. They didn't replace it with a different character. They were just riding the celebrity hype of Maisie Williams in an Arya costume, acting like a stereotype of her earlier performances. But at least Game of Thrones started out as an adaptation of Martin's novels, and coasting along on that, there was still some echo of that there should be a story to tell here based on where we started, or at least it was resembling Martin's books in Seasons 1 through 4. There was some idea of, you have to have a conclusion to these storylines we started. Turns out they didn't, but there was an expectation of that, at least. The Long Night prequel was just stripped down to its core the only parts HBO cared about. Some blind hype around brand names, and insert some celebrities, red carpet hype. And just, I'm only scratching the surface on this, and we will never know, or not for years. just because they haven't reported on it. There's a lot of story to tell here in terms of the behind-the-scenes nightmare on this that they have hushed up very well. Think of how much time, energy, money, and resources were wasted on this hack job of a prequel. HBO doesn't have infinite money. The money they spent on Long Night will have no return on the investment. It's money they took away from other shows. Whenever they go, oh yeah, watch something else. Well, I wanted to watch this adaptation of another show, not Game of Thrones, just some other project that you didn't pick up because you spent a year on this Long Night pilot that was turned out to be trash. So they wasted those resources. And there's other finite resources. They squandered all of the momentum coming out of the original series. A full year of production was wasted. And I realize you just listening to this might not have the same perspective I do, because I'm in this very deep, that I have been making reports 1 week at a time for over a year. Anyone who is really closely following the news 1 day at a time about Long Night through 2019, reading every new set report we got, think of how much mental energy and focus went to waste on that. And production-wise, just all of these companies, the man-hours, the labor, that was for nothing. For what they were warned was a terrible idea to begin with. The Game of Thrones pilot, the original one, cost $10 million and had to be completely reshot for another $10 million. But let's say Long Night cost $10 million to make, possibly more, because they said, we are willing to spend more money on this than the relatively shoestring budget we gained. Well, it was the most expensive pilot ever, and it was a shoestring budget relative to what they needed, because they needed even more than that at the time for the Game of Thrones pilot. But they said, we are willing to spend more on this out of the gate, because the original series was successful. So it's probably more than $10 million that they spent on this. How much money truly went to waste? It's not even like Game of Thrones Season 8 going to waste. That still aired as TV episodes. This is stuff human eyes will never even see, that other than the people who built it and filmed it. And even then, like, the cast members never see the finished product with all the CGI or edited together. How many people actually saw the rough cut of this? A handful of HBO executives, some of the upper production staff, like the showrunner. How few people ever actually saw the finished thing? How many just artists, prop makers, heraldry designers, actors, all of this work went to waste on a mistake, what was always a mistake. What book fans were complaining was a stupid idea since day one. And do you realize, and I'm not exaggerating here, that the failure of the Long Night prequel might have made the new HBO leadership under AT&T give up on this franchise entirely? Give up on making the real prequels that actually were good, and the kid who did his homework, the real prequels from Fire and Blood, like Targaryen Conquest or Dance of the Dragons. We're going to get House of the Dragon. But the new leadership might have gotten so frustrated at the double blow of Season 8 was awful, even by their own standards, and even relative to Season 5 it was awful. And then you're faced with this absurd, we can't air this, it's utterly racist, and that's only one of its many problems. Pilot. Do you realize that last October, HBO could have looked at this and said, we're stepping away from this franchise. We are losing money on it. And you've already had 2 big failures. Thankfully they didn't, because they're smart enough to realize, no, there are other really good prequel ideas. The prequels Martin himself wrote, and not one we made up without him. But, I mean, it wasn't, an over 50% danger, but, not less than 1%. Like, there was like a 5 to 10% chance, just in my mind. There was a not insignificant chance that the failure of the Long Night pilot could have destroyed this franchise. Yes, they said, oh, we had the other 4 pitches just in case it didn't work out. But you never know. Like, I like to hope there's going to be another attempt at adapting the A Song of Ice and Fire novels in my lifetime, in the next 40 years. There was a chance that this mistake was so bad, because mistakes do have consequences, that the new HBO leadership would have given up on it, it would have floated around between networks, and we might not see a real attempt at adapting the core novels again in our lifetimes in the next 50 years. It'll be like Tolkien fans waiting for a real Lord of the Rings adaptation for 30 years after there were some vague attempts at cartoons in the 70s. That is the timescale they risked. Think about that the old HBO leadership was willing to put all their eggs in one basket like that on this crazy, unproven idea with obvious, crippling flaws to it. If nothing else, it demonstrably destroyed their production location, that they can't work in Belfast anymore because Titanic Studios is warning them. Please, make more than one prequel pilot at a time. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. If the first one fails, we can't wait around for the next one. They did that anyway, and they're not in Northern Ireland anymore. They're moving to Leavesden in England. And there's no going back from that. These are long-term consequences of the Long Night prequel. One of the big ones is it meant they couldn't film in Northern Ireland. The way they filmed this was the last big project, and you saw all these wonderful people from the Northern Ireland production crew thinking, hoping that this would be their careers for the next decade, is working on the Long Night prequel if it was good. We could have had House of the Dragon filming in Northern Ireland. This is something they took away from us due to their incompetence and their arrogance. I realize this can't actually be true, but part of me is left openly wondering if HBO's outgoing executives, their outgoing CEO Richard Plepler, wondering if he actually wanted this show to succeed. Well, not necessarily that it was a Bialystock and Bloom situation from Mel Brooks's producers, that they intended to take the money and run. I don't know if it was even that coherent of an idea. You have to remember the context that things are produced in, out of universe, the internal politics at the production company. After AT&T bought out HBO, Plepler was under a lot of scrutiny he'd never been under before, and ultimately this indeed drove him to leave his position. But back when he picked Long Night over all the other ones in mid-2018, Plepler was looking for the easiest sell, the best soundbite in a pitch meeting. Dance of the Dragons is a bit hard to explain as a short soundbite, much as Game of Thrones was hard to give as a soundbite. Well, there's these 7 kingdoms, and they're fighting, but there's also Daenerys, there's also White Walkers. It's hard to give a soundbite for because there's a lot of story to it. Conversely, Long Night was easy to give a short pitch about, specifically because there wasn't really that much to tell. There wasn't much story to it, so it was easy to sum it up very succinctly. They weren't worried about winning and performing well at the Season 1 phase. He cheated. He picked the best sounding soundbite, the best pitch, with no thought to tomorrow of, well, we picked the one that sounds best. On a casual level, it's actually got problems when you peel back the layers. Anyone could have told him this within a day. Anyone familiar with the books could have said there's actually problems with it. But you have to step back and just be aware that we are rational people who calmly think out the long-term repercussions of things. We plan for tomorrow. HBO's old leadership, Plepler, in mid-2018, they were panicking, worried AT&T would force them out, as they eventually did, and Plepler was just living from one day to the next. No thought to the future. They worried about which prequel would sound best in a pitch meeting to their new bosses at AT&T. And I don't think Plepler was really thinking about more than the day in front of him. And as it turns out, he didn't have to worry about whether this was a good idea or not. Plepler had his golden parachute. He jumped ship and now he's heading up Apple TV+. He jumped over to another network. Really keep in mind what happened, that Richard Plepler, the idiot who picked Long Night over all the other candidates and started this whole mess, ultimately left HBO in February of 2019. February 2019, which was right before the actual filming on the Long Night pilot started. That they had already been making casting wave announcements, big formal announcements of this is wave 1 on January 10th it was. February, he was gone. They hadn't even announced the second casting wave. And then they started filming around May of 2019. Though, they had casting, they had set construction had been going on since the beginning of the year, prepping everything. Prep was underway. But before the first camera actually rolled, he bailed on them. He never had to deal with the obvious repercussions of such an awful choice. I want people who consider pitching their shows to Apple TV Plus, somehow, if you see this video I'm making and talking right now on a news site, I want you to consider whether you trust your content, like Asimov's Foundation series, to this madman, to this incompetent. He never had to deal with the repercussions. He ran out the door shouting, "No backsies!" And this mess became, it's someone else's problem. Rebuilding this franchise after his incompetence and negligence wrecked it by letting Benioff run free rein over the whole thing. Rebuilding this franchise out of the hole he left us in became someone else's problem. I need all of you to become his problem. Please help by sharing this summary report video around the internet as many ways as you can think of, on social media, on Reddit. If you're an entertainment reporter for a mainstream news site, please consider posting a review of it. I did the best I could with it, piecing together all the various reports and some leaks that were original from me. I've presented the most coherent picture we have of what this scam was actually like. And like Rashomon, it's not consistent, but 3 people are describing something, and each of them it's slightly different, but there's a surprising amount of overlap. That they're all mentioning a wedding, they're all mentioning these other elements, that it's starting to all point towards a rough shape of what they were trying to do. And it's better than when we were in total darkness last year and just sitting around waiting for them to tell us about it. But I've done as much investigative work as I can. The people who did this need to be held accountable, or the same thing could just as easily happen again. We've been living with lies and gaslighting for years, for the past decade. But they finally caught up with the corrupt plutocrats who didn't even know how to hang on to what they had. For years, people were scared to report on all this. Now is the time. HBO had a change in leadership. They have new owners. Criticizing the old leadership who got kicked out will not incur the wrath of the current leadership. You can mock Long Night with impunity and not risk your business relationship with the current heads of HBO and AT&T. The lies have to end. This is a process of lies on a scale of 10 years until it was easier just to live with it. But they can't break us. The Long Night prequel was like all the lies that led to the Game of Thrones TV series, trying to happen a second time, all condensed into the experience of one pilot episode, and cranked up to 11. Remember who you are. Remember that you do not deserve to be treated like this. Demand accountability. Demand repercussions. Please help expose what really happened.